I was 34 years old when I found those messages. Standing in our kitchen, staring at my husband's phone, my world shattered into 1,000 pieces. 7 years of marriage, and Daniel was planning a 2-week Caribbean cruise with another woman. I should have confronted him immediately, screamed, thrown things. Instead, I made a different choice. I booked myself on that same cruise, because sometimes the best revenge isn't just showing up, it's showing up prepared. If you're watching this, let me know where you're from in the comments, hit that like button, and subscribe to hear how this all played out. When I first met Daniel at an architecture conference in Boston, I never imagined we'd end up here. I was presenting my interior design portfolio, and he approached me afterward with genuine interest in my use of sustainable materials. His blue eyes lit up when he talked about merging environmental consciousness with beautiful spaces. 3 coffee dates later, I knew I'd found someone special. We married after 2 years of dating in a small ceremony at my parents' lakeside home in upstate New York. Everything felt perfect. We bought a fixer-upper that we renovated together, blending his architectural vision with my interior design skills. Our friends called it the dream house, and it truly was. Every corner held a memory of us planning, arguing playfully over paint colours, and celebrating small victories with takeout dinners on the floor. Our routines were comfortable. Sunday morning pancakes with real maple syrup. Thursday night board games where Daniel always let me win at Scrabble, but never admitted it. Annual trips to national parks where we'd disconnect from technology and reconnect with each other. For 5 years, we built what I thought was an unshakable foundation. The first crack appeared last September. Daniel's architecture firm landed a contract with Summit Development, a major commercial real estate company expanding along the East Coast. The project meant a significant promotion for him, but also longer hours, more stress, and frequent meetings with new clients. "This is going to change everything for us," he'd said, spinning me around our kitchen. "Once this project is completed, we'll take that trip to Italy you've always wanted." I believed him. I supported him. I understood when Friday date nights became rain checks, and when he started missing dinner 3 times a week. I listened to his stories about the challenges of the project, the demanding clients, and his new team members. There was Jessica from the interior design division, who apparently had revolutionary ideas about commercial spaces. Daniel mentioned her more and more frequently. At first, I thought nothing of it. After all, I worked with male colleagues all the time. Professional relationships were just that, professional. By winter, the small changes became impossible to ignore. Daniel no longer left his phone on the coffee table while showering. He started taking calls in another room. The man who once couldn't go an hour without sending me a funny meme or a sweet text was suddenly too busy to respond to messages until hours later. I tried talking to him about it one evening in February. "Do you think we could plan something special for our anniversary in May?" I asked, curling up beside him on the couch. He tensed slightly. "May is going to be crazy with the project. The client wants preliminary designs by June. Even just a weekend getaway, we haven't had any us time in months." Daniel sighed, running his hand through his hair the way he did when he was stressed. "Can we talk about this later? I've got a presentation tomorrow I need to prepare for." Later never came. Instead, conversations about vacation plans were met with vague responses or outright avoidance. When I suggested a summer trip in July, he mentioned potential meetings with international investors that could happen any time between June and August. By April, I felt like I was living with a stranger. The man who once couldn't wait to tell me about his day now offered only brief summaries. Physical intimacy had dwindled to quick kisses, goodbye, and occasional, almost obligatory weekend encounters that left me feeling more alone than before. I wasn't naive. I knew relationships went through phases. I tried arranging surprise lunch dates at his office, only to be told he was in meetings. I bought new lingerie that remained unworn in my drawer. I even suggested couples therapy, which he dismissed as unnecessary. "It's just work stress," he assured me. "Once this project phase is complete, everything will go back to normal. I wanted to believe him. I needed to believe him. Q. After all, we had built this life together, brick by brick, dream by dream. I couldn't imagine that he would willingly destroy what we had created. But as spring bloomed outside our windows, our marriage continued to wither. And then came that fateful night in early May, when everything I had suspected but refused to acknowledge came crashing into reality. It was a Tuesday evening when I discovered the truth. Daniel had come home earlier than usual, complaining of a headache. He took some medicine and headed for the shower, leaving his phone on the kitchen counter. He never left his phone unattended anymore, which should have been my first clue that something was different about tonight. I was chopping vegetables for dinner when the screen lit up with a notification. I wasn't trying to snoop, I swear, but the preview message caught my eye instantly. Jessica from Project Cabin is booked upper deck with balcony. Caribbean sun, here we come. My knife froze mid-chop. Caribbean cabin. The words seemed to pulse on the screen, taunting me. Daniel hadn't mentioned any work trips to the Caribbean, especially not ones involving cabins with balconies. The rational part of my brain tried to create innocent explanations. Perhaps it was a work retreat. Maybe the whole team was going. But deep down, I knew the secret phone calls, the late nights, the emotional distance. All the puzzle pieces were suddenly forming a picture I didn't want to see. I stared at his phone for what felt like an eternity. The shower was still running. I knew Daniel's password. He'd never changed it from the year we met and the first 2 digits of his birth month. 7 years of trust meant we'd always had access to each other's devices, not that we regularly checked them. My hands trembled as I picked up the phone. One part of me screamed to put it down, to preserve what little was left of my faith in our marriage. But another part, the part that had been silenced for months while I made excuses for his behaviour, reached out and typed in the password. The phone unlocked, revealing a string of messages between Daniel and Jessica from Project. I scrolled up each swipe of my finger, revealing more betrayal. "Can't wait for 2 weeks away from everything," she had written. "Just you, me and the ocean." "I told Laverna it's a business trip to Seattle," Daniel had replied. "What about Tom?" "Told him I'm going with the girls from college. He doesn't suspect a thing." Tom. Jessica had a husband too. They weren't just betraying me, they were betraying another person as well. The cruelty of their deception took my breath away. I kept scrolling, unable to stop myself. There were photos they'd taken together, lunch dates, drinks after work. A selfie in what looked like Daniel's car. In one, his arm was around her waist in a way that was unmistakably intimate. They looked happy, carefree, in love. The shower turned off. I quickly put the phone back exactly where he'd left it and returned to chopping vegetables, my mind racing and my heart breaking into 1,000 pieces. The cruise was scheduled for June 10th, just 3 weeks away. They had planned everything, their cabin excursions, even a special dinner on the 3rd night. When Daniel came into the kitchen, hair still damp from the shower, I somehow managed to continue cooking as if my entire world hadn't just collapsed. He kissed my cheek absent-mindedly and asked what was for dinner. "Just a stir-fry," I answered, amazed at how normal my voice sounded when everything inside me was screaming. That night, I lay beside him in our bed, staring at the ceiling, careful to keep my breathing even so he wouldn't know I was awake. Questions tormented me. How long had it been going on? Did he love her? Was our entire marriage a lie? What had I done wrong? Around 3 in the morning, I slipped out of bed and went to the guest room where I finally allowed myself to cry. Silent sobs racked my body as I curled into a ball on the unfamiliar mattress. By dawn, my eyes were swollen, my throat raw, and my mind made up. I wouldn't confront Daniel. Not yet. I needed time to think, to plan, to figure out how to confront this heartbreak on my own terms. Because one thing was certain, I would not let him see me fall apart. I would not give him and Jessica the satisfaction of breaking me. Whatever happened next, I would face it standing tall. The morning after discovering Daniel's betrayal, I called in sick to work for the first time in years. There was no way I could focus on colour schemes and furniture layouts when my life was crumbling around me. Once Daniel left for work with the usual quick kiss and distracted goodbye, I called the one person I knew would help me through this, my best friend, Natalie. He did what? Natalie's voice exploded through the phone when I finished explaining. That lying, cheating scumbag, I'm coming over right now. We're going to call a lawyer, change the locks, and throw all his designer clothes on the front lawn. Despite my heartbreak, I found myself smiling weakly at her fierce loyalty. That's not what I want to do, Nat. What do you mean you can't possibly be considering forgiving him? No, I said firmly, surprised by my own certainty. Our marriage is over, but I don't want a typical confrontation with screaming and accusations. I want something more, fitting. There was a pause on the line. I'm listening, Natalie finally said. I told her about the cruise, explaining my half-formed plan to book myself on the same ship. I want to see his face when he realizes I know everything. I want to control how this ends. Natalie was skeptical at first, concerned about the emotional toll such a plan would take. Are you sure you want to put yourself through that? Being on a ship with them for 2 weeks sounds like torture. I need this, I insisted. I need to take back control in a way that confronting him at home wouldn't allow. Plus, I added with grim determination, I've always wanted to see the Caribbean. Once Natalie reluctantly agreed to support my decision, I got to work. I still had all the details from Daniel's phone, the cruise line departure date, and even the deck they would be staying on. I called the cruise company directly. Good morning, Sunset Cruises. How can I help you today? A cheerful voice answered. I swallowed hard. I'd like to book a cabin on your Caribbean cruise departing June 10th. Wonderful choice. That's one of our most popular summer itineraries. We visit 6 islands over 14 days, with all-inclusive dining and entertainment. I listened as she described the available cabins. Jessica and Daniel had booked an upper-deck balcony suite on the starboard side. I chose a similar cabin, but on the port side, close enough to execute my plan, but not so close we'd constantly run into each other. The price made me wince. Nearly $4,000 for a single occupancy cabin, money that had been earmarked for our kitchen renovation, but I had my own savings account, a habit my mother had insisted upon when I got married. Always have your own money, she'd said, just in case. I never thought in case would mean funding a revenge cruise. After booking the trip, I called my boss at the design firm and requested 2 weeks of vacation. As I had suspected, he was surprised but supportive. You and Daniel finally taking that big trip you've been talking about. Something like that, I answered vaguely. Next came the practical preparations. I needed new clothes suitable for a cruise. My usual wardrobe of business casual and weekend loungewear wouldn't cut it. I spent an afternoon shopping for sundresses, swimsuits, and evening wear. I even splurged on an elegant red dress that I knew would stand out in any dining room. The hardest part was acting normal around Daniel for the 3 weeks before the cruise. Every "I love you" felt like ash in my mouth. Every question about his day made me wonder if he'd been with her. But somehow, I managed to maintain the facade. I even helped him pack for his business trip to Seattle, suggesting shirts I knew would be appropriate for a cruise, while he made up elaborate lies about client meetings and presentations. The night before his departure, Daniel seemed almost nervous, checking his suitcase multiple times and setting several alarms. Big presentation tomorrow, I asked innocently, knowing full well there was no presentation. Yeah, potential new investors, he lied smoothly. I should get to sleep. Early flight. As he slept beside me, for what would likely be one of the last times I stared at the ceiling rehearsing what I would say when we finally came face to face on that ship. Part of me wanted to hurt him as badly as he'd hurt me. Another part just wanted answers. Why wasn't I enough? When had he stopped loving me? Or had he ever truly loved me at all? Morning came too quickly. I made Daniel breakfast as usual, kissed him goodbye at the door, and whispered, "Good luck with your presentation," as he loaded his suitcase into the car. He looked me directly in the eyes and said, "I'll call you when I land in Seattle." Another lie, another knife in my heart. I watched his car disappear down our tree-lined street, then closed the door and leaned against it, finally allowing myself a moment of breakdown, but only a moment. I had exactly 4 hours until my own flight to Miami, where I would board the same cruise ship as my husband and his lover. It was time to pack my bags and my courage. The journey to Miami passed in a blur. I barely noticed the cramped airplane seats or the chatty passenger beside me. My mind was too occupied with running through scenarios of what would happen once I boarded that cruise ship. Miami's port was bustling with activity when my taxi pulled up. Massive ships lined the docks like gleaming white mountains, each one a floating city promising escape and adventure. Under different circumstances, I might have been excited. Instead, I felt a strange, calm determination as I wheeled my suitcase toward the Sunset Majesty, the vessel that would be both my prison and my liberation for the next 2 weeks. Check-in was surprisingly efficient. I presented my passport and booking information to a smiling attendant who seemed genuinely thrilled about my upcoming vacation. "First time cruising with us, Ms. Davis?" "Yes," I answered, using my maiden name, the name I had booked under. Daniel wouldn't be able to spot me on any passenger lists. "You're going to have an amazing time. We have a welcome reception at 4 on the Lido deck, and dinner begins at 6:30. I nodded politely, accepting the room keycard and ship information package. According to the embarkation schedule, passengers could board between noon and 4, with the ship departing at 5. I had deliberately arrived early, giving myself time to settle in before Daniel and Jessica were likely to arrive. My cabin was small but comfortable, with a queen-sized bed, compact bathroom, and a small balcony overlooking the port. I unpacked methodically, hanging my dresses in the narrow closet and arranging my toiletries in the bathroom. Every action felt surreal, like I was watching someone else go through the motions. Once unpacked, I sat on the balcony, watching new passengers board. From my vantage point on the port side of Deck 8, I could see much of the boarding area. I wore large sunglasses and a wide-brimmed hat as a precaution. The last thing I wanted was for Daniel to spot me before I was ready. At about 3:30, I saw them. Daniel in his favourite blue button-down shirt, the one I had ironed for his business trip. Beside him stood a tall woman with long blonde hair and a confident stride, Jessica. Seeing them together in person made my stomach clench painfully. They weren't being overtly affectionate, standing a professional distance apart, but there was an unmistakable intimacy in how they leaned toward each other, how he took her suitcase, how she laughed at something he said. My husband, with another woman, about to board a romantic cruise. The reality of it hit me with fresh force, and I gripped the balcony railing to steady myself. I watched until they disappeared into the terminal, then retreated into my cabin. The ship's horn blasted, announcing our imminent departure. I felt the subtle movement as the massive vessel began to pull away from the dock. There was no going back now. Instead of attending the welcome reception, I ordered room service, a small sandwich and some tea. I needed time to gather my thoughts and finalize my plan. The confrontation wouldn't happen tonight. I wanted them to have one evening of their fantasy vacation before I shattered their illusion. A knock at my door startled me from my thoughts. It was the cabin attendant, a young woman with a friendly smile and a name tag that read, Ashley. "Good evening, Ms. Davis. I'm Ashley, and I'll be taking care of your cabin during your cruise. Is there anything you need right now?" Something about her genuine warmth broke through my careful composure. "Actually, is it possible to get a glass of wine?" I asked, my voice slightly unsteady. Ashley must have noticed something in my expression. "Of course, red or white. And if you don't mind me saying, cruising alone can be tough the first night, but I promise you'll make friends in no time." I managed a small smile. Red, please, and thank you. I'm sure it will all work out, one way or another. After she left, I stepped back onto the balcony. The Miami coastline was receding into the distance, the city lights twinkling like stars fallen to earth. The warm ocean breeze carried the scent of salt and possibilities. For a brief moment, I allowed myself to imagine a different scenario, one where I was on this ship for pleasure, not to confront my husband's betrayal. That evening, I stayed in my cabin, watching the endless ocean through my window and planning every detail of tomorrow's encounter. I would find them at dinner in the main dining room. I would wear the red dress, the one that always made Daniel's eyes linger, and I would finally get the truth face to face, with nowhere for either of them to run. As I drifted off to sleep in the gently rocking cabin, one thought kept circling in my mind. By this time tomorrow, my marriage would officially be over, but at least it would be on my terms. I barely slept that night. The gentle rocking of the ship, which might have been soothing under different circumstances, only served to amplify my anxiety. By morning, I had rehearsed dozens of versions of the confrontation, ranging from ice-cold dignity to tearful accusations. None of them felt quite right, but I knew that when the moment came, my true feelings would guide me. I spent most of the first day avoiding the main areas of the ship. I ordered breakfast to my room, then found a quiet corner of a less frequented deck to read a book I couldn't focus on. Every time I saw a tall man with dark hair or a blonde woman in the distance, my heart would race, but it was never them. According to the ship's daily newsletter, there was a formal dinner that evening in the Grand Sapphire dining room. If Daniel and Jessica were following typical first-day patterns, they would likely attend. It was the perfect setting for what I had in mind. Back in my cabin, I prepared with the focus of someone going into battle. I showered, dried my hair until it fell in soft waves past my shoulders, and applied makeup more carefully than I had in months. Foundation to even my skin tone, subtle contouring to enhance my cheekbones, and deep red lipstick to match the dress I would wear. The dress itself was a statement piece in scarlet silk that draped elegantly across my body, with a modest neckline but an open back that Daniel had always found alluring. I completed the look with the diamond earrings he had given me for our 5th anniversary and strappy black heels that added 3 inches to my height. Looking in the mirror, I barely recognized myself. Gone was the wounded wife, the woman who had cried herself to sleep. In her place stood someone powerful, someone in control. Ashley knocked on my door for evening turn-down service and gasped when she saw me. "Ms. Davis, you look absolutely stunning." I managed a genuine smile. "Thank you, Ashley. Tonight's an important night." "Hot date?" she asked playfully. I let out a small, humorless laugh. "Something like that." By the time I reached the entrance to the Grand Sapphire dining room, my heart was pounding so hard I was sure others could hear it. The maitre d' greeted me with professional courtesy. "Table for 1, Ms. Davis. Would you prefer to join a group table or dine alone?" I scanned the already busy room, and there they were, seated at a table for 2 near the window, looking out at the darkening ocean. Daniel was wearing his charcoal grey suit, the one I had helped him choose for special occasions. Jessica wore a black cocktail dress that highlighted her slim figure. "Actually," I said to the maitre d', "I see some people I know. I'll join them." Before he could respond, I was moving across the dining room, weaving between tables with determined grace. Neither Daniel nor Jessica noticed me approaching, too absorbed in what appeared to be an intimate conversation over wine. I stopped directly beside their table. "What a coincidence running into you here, Daniel, especially when you're supposed to be in Seattle." The colour drained from my husband's face as he looked up and saw me standing there in my red dress and quiet fury. His wineglass slipped from his fingers, spilling deep red liquid across the white tablecloth like blood. "Laverna," he choked out, half rising from his seat. What are you doing here?" Jessica looked between us with growing confusion. Daniel, who is this? I extended my hand to her with a cold smile. I'm Laverna, Daniel's wife of 7 years, and you must be Jessica from the project. I've heard so much about you. Well, at least I did, once I found your messages on his phone. Jessica's expression transformed from confusion to shock to anger in the span of seconds. Wife, she turned to Daniel. You said you were divorced. Daniel stood fully now, his face ashen. Laverna, I can explain. This isn't what it looks like. I laughed, the sound brittle even to my own ears. Really, because it looks like you're on a romantic cruise with your mistress, while your wife thinks you're on a business trip to Seattle. Please enlighten me about what it actually is. By now, nearby tables had fallen silent diners, pretending not to watch the drama unfolding. Jessica pushed her chair back with such force it nearly toppled over. You told me you'd been divorced for over a year, she hissed at Daniel. You showed me papers. Forged divorce papers, I added helpfully. That's a nice touch, Daniel. Very thorough. Daniel reached for my arm. Laverna, please. Can we talk about this privately? I stepped back, avoiding his touch. Why are you embarrassed? Worried about making a scene? Funny you weren't worried about my feelings when you were planning this trip. Jessica grabbed her purse and stood up. I can't believe this. I left my husband alone with our children for this vacation because you said we deserved time together after your divorce. She turned to me with genuine remorse in her eyes. I swear to you, I had no idea he was still married. He's been telling me for months that his divorce was finalized last year. I believed her. The shock and betrayal on her face were too raw to be fake. Daniel had been playing both of us. Wait, Jessica, Daniel pleaded, reaching for her now. I can explain everything. In response, Jessica picked up her still full wine glass and emptied it directly onto Daniel's lap. Explain it to your wife, she said, then turned and walked away, dignity intact despite the whispers and stares around us. Left alone with Daniel, I felt strangely calm. The confrontation I had rehearsed dozens of times was playing out differently than I had imagined, but somehow it felt right. I hadn't needed to say much at all. The truth had done all the work for me. You lied to her too, I said quietly. That's almost impressive, Daniel, maintaining two completely different narratives. Daniel sank back into his chair, wine soaking the front of his expensive suit pants. Laverna, please sit down. Let me at least try to explain. I looked at him, the man I had loved, the man I had built a life with, and felt nothing but pity. There's nothing to explain, but don't worry, I won't be joining you for dinner. I just wanted you to know, and that I deserve better than this. So much better. With that, I turned and walked away, feeling dozens of eyes on my back and the weight of my wedding ring heavy on my finger. By the time I reached the exit, I had slipped the ring off and tucked it into my clutch. It was the first step of many I would need to take, but in that moment, it felt like the most significant one. I returned to my cabin feeling strangely light, as if confronting Daniel had lifted a heavy weight I'd been carrying. I kicked off my heels and stepped onto the balcony, breathing in the salty night air. The vastness of the ocean stretched before me, dark and mysterious under the moonlight. For the first time since discovering Daniel's betrayal, I felt like I could breathe without pain squeezing my chest. The knock on my door came about 20 minutes later. I knew it would be Daniel. Part of me wanted to ignore it to leave our confrontation in the dining room as the final word. But another part, perhaps the stronger part, knew we needed proper closure. Who is it? I called, though I already knew. It's me. Daniel's voice was subdued. Please, Laverna, we need to talk. I opened the door to find him standing there still in his wine-stained suit, his face haggard with stress. I stepped aside wordlessly to let him in, but left the door open, a strategic choice that said this wouldn't be a long conversation. Daniel paced the small cabin like a caged animal. How did you find out? How did you know to come here? I crossed my arms. Does it matter you left your phone unattended? I saw Jessica's message about the cabin being booked. After that, it wasn't hard to piece things together. He ran his hands through his hair, a gesture so familiar it made my heart ache despite everything. I never meant for this to happen. Jessica and it started as just friendship, working late nights, sharing ideas about the project. Spare me the cliches, I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. Friendship doesn't lead to forged divorce papers and secret cruises. Daniel sank onto the edge of the bed. Things haven't been right between us for a while, Laverna. You must have felt it too. The audacity of his attempt to shift blame ignited my anger. Things weren't right because you were having an affair. Don't you dare try to make this my fault. That's not what I meant. He backpedaled quickly. The project put so much pressure on me. Jessica understood the challenges I was facing. She was there every day, and slowly things just evolved. Evolved, I repeated incredulously. Things don't evolve into betrayal, Daniel. You made choices. Every lie, every secret meeting, every time you looked me in the eye and said you were working late, those were choices. Daniel looked down at his hands. You're right. I made terrible choices. But I did love you, Laverna. I still do. I laughed bitterly. Love doesn't look like this. Love doesn't lie. Love doesn't cheat. I got caught up in something I didn't know how to stop, he said, his voice breaking. The more time passed, the bigger the lies became. I didn't know how to tell you without destroying everything. So instead, you thought you'd just continue deceiving me indefinitely. What was the end game here, Daniel? He had no answer for that, and his silence told me everything I needed to know. He hadn't thought that far ahead. He'd been living in the moment, pursuing his desires, without consideration for the consequences. I walked to my purse and pulled out my phone. I've already contacted a lawyer. The papers will be ready when we get back. Daniel's head snapped up. Divorce papers, Laverna, isn't that rushing things. We could try counselling, take some time to work through this. The desperation in his voice might once have swayed me, made me reconsider. Not anymore. There's nothing to work through. You destroyed our marriage the moment you decided to pursue Jessica. You destroyed it further when you planned this trip and lied to my face about it. And you obliterated any remaining chance when you created fake divorce papers to seduce another man's wife. As the words left my mouth, I realized they were true. There was no coming back from this level of betrayal, this web of calculated deception. What about Jessica? Are you going to tell her husband? Daniel asked, and I could hear the fear in his voice. That's not my responsibility, I replied. But if I were you, I'd be worried about whether she might tell him herself. Daniel stood, making one last, desperate appeal. Can't we at least talk about this more, maybe tomorrow when things have calmed down? I shook my head. There's nothing left to say. I'm going to enjoy the rest of this cruise by myself. I suggest you do the same. I don't want to see you again until we're back home and it's time to sign the papers. This ship isn't that big, Laverna. We're bound to run into each other. Then I expect you to do the decent thing and walk the other way. I moved to the door and held it open. Goodbye, Daniel. He paused at the doorway, looking at me with what seemed like genuine regret. For what it's worth, I am sorry. Truly sorry. So am I said quietly, but not sorry enough to forgive this. As the door closed behind him, I let out a long, shaky breath. The confrontation was over. The hard part was done. Now, I just had to figure out how to spend 2 weeks on a cruise ship while avoiding my soon-to-be ex-husband and beginning the process of rebuilding my life from scratch. I stepped back onto the balcony and looked up at the stars. They seemed brighter out here on the open ocean, away from city lights and the life I had known. As painful as this experience was, perhaps there was also an opportunity hidden within it, an opportunity to rediscover who I was, apart from being Daniel's wife. Tomorrow would be the first day of that journey. The next morning I woke to sunshine streaming through my balcony door. For a brief, blissful moment, I forgot where I was and why. Then reality crashed back, but strangely, it didn't feel as overwhelming as before. I had survived the confrontation. I had stood my ground. Now, I had 14 days on a luxury cruise ship to figure out what came next. I decided to embrace the experience rather than hide from it. After a room service breakfast, I consulted the ship's activity schedule and chose a beginner's yoga class on the upper deck. Physical movement might help clear my head, and being in a group setting meant Daniel was unlikely to approach me even if he happened to be there. The yoga class was led by an energetic instructor named Marco, who emphasized that beginners were welcome. "Cruises are about trying new things," he announced to our group of about 15 people. I positioned my mat in the back corner, feeling self-conscious in my hastily purchased workout clothes. As we moved through gentle poses, the ocean breeze cooling my skin, I found myself actually relaxing. The rhythmic movement and focus on breathing pushed thoughts of Daniel to the periphery of my mind. For those 50 minutes, I was just a body on a mat, learning to find balance. After class, an older woman who had been on the mat next to mine introduced herself. "I'm Eleanor. First cruise." "Is it that obvious?" I asked with a small smile. "You have that overwhelmed look we all get the first time," she chuckled. "My husband Harold and I are on our 7th cruise. We're practically professionals at this point." "Any tips for a novice?" I asked, surprising myself by engaging in the conversation rather than making a quick exit. "Join activities, try the specialty restaurants, and don't feel like you need to do everything," Eleanor advised. "Oh, and Harold and I are hosting an informal card game in the Promenade Lounge this afternoon if you'd like to join. Nothing serious. Just a few hands of rummy to pass the time." Under normal circumstances, I might have politely declined, but these weren't normal circumstances, and the thought of sitting alone in my cabin dwelling on Daniel seemed unbearable. "I'd like that," I heard myself say. "Thank you," Eleanor beamed. "Wonderful 3 o'clock. And bring an appetite. They serve those little tea sandwiches that Harold can't get enough of." The card game turned out to be exactly what I needed. Eleanor and Harold were retired teachers from Minnesota with a warmth that put me at ease immediately. The other players included a brother and sister traveling together to celebrate her cancer remission, and a woman named Diana, who, like me, was traveling alone. "My husband doesn't like cruises," Diana explained when Harold asked if she was solo. "I got tired of missing out on things he doesn't enjoy, so now we take separate vacations sometimes. He goes fishing with his buddies. I take cruises." Her confidence and independence struck me. Here was a woman who had found a way to maintain her marriage while still honouring her own desires. Would Daniel and I have reached that point naturally if he hadn't chosen deception? Instead, I would never know. When Eleanor asked about my situation, I gave a simplified version of the truth. "I'm going through a separation. This trip was supposed to be a way to clear my head." The group offered sympathetic nods, but blessedly didn't press for details. Instead, Diana patted my hand and said, "Well, you couldn't have picked a better place for a fresh start. By the time we reach St. Thomas, you'll have a whole new perspective." Over the next several days, I developed a routine. Mornings began with yoga or a walk around the ship's track. Afternoons were spent reading by one of the quieter pools or joining activities that interested me: a watercolour class, a cooking demonstration, a lecture on Caribbean history. Evenings usually involved dinner with my new friends, followed by a show in the main theatre, or quiet drinks while listening to the jazz trio in the Starlight Lounge. I spotted Daniel and Jessica a few times from a distance. They no longer looked like the carefree couple I'd observed in Miami. Jessica kept her distance from him, and their body language screamed discomfort. Once Daniel saw me across a crowded deck and started to approach, but I quickly turned and walked the other way, as I'd instructed him to do. 5 days into the cruise, I was returning to my cabin after breakfast when I ran into Ashley, my cabin attendant. "Ms. Davis, I've been meaning to ask how you've been enjoying the cruise." Her genuine interest had become a bright spot in my days. Better than expected, actually, I admitted. I'm trying new things. Ashley smiled. I noticed the towel animals I leave seem to be getting less use than I see in most cabins. I laughed. I've been busy. In fact, I'm signed up for snorkeling at our port stop tomorrow. First time. You'll love it. The reefs at St. Lucia are amazing. She hesitated, then added, I hope you don't mind me saying, but you seem different from when you first came aboard. More, I don't know, peaceful. Her observation surprised me. Do I? Definitely. Something changed after that first formal dinner. I considered telling her the whole story. After all cruise ships were like their own little worlds, and Ashley had been nothing but kind. I confronted my cheating husband that night, I found myself saying. He was on this same cruise with another woman. Ashley's eyes widened. Oh my God, that was you. The whole staff heard about the wine incident in the Sapphire Room. I cringed. Great, I'm ship famous. In the best way possible, Ashley assured me. Everyone's on your side. We see cheaters on these cruises more often than you'd think, but most spouses don't find out until they get home. I got lucky, I suppose. If finding out your husband is cheating can ever be considered lucky. You got closure, Ashley said thoughtfully, and from what I hear, you handled it with class. That's worth something. She was right, I realised. As painful as the confrontation had been, it had given me something invaluable, the truth on my terms, and the chance to respond with dignity. On the 8th day of the cruise, I finally called my parents. I had sent them brief texts saying I was taking some time for myself, but I hadn't shared the full story. It was time. Sweetheart, how's Seattle? Is Daniel showing you all his favourite spots? My mother asked brightly. I took a deep breath. Mum, I'm not in Seattle. I'm on a cruise in the Caribbean, and Daniel and I are getting divorced. The silence on the other end spoke volumes. Then my mother's voice, softer now. Tell me everything, Laverna. So I did. The discovery, the planning, the confrontation, all of it. By the end, I could hear my father in the background, his angry muttering about that no-good architect. Oh, honey, my mother said when I finished. What an ordeal, but I have to say you've handled it with remarkable strength. I don't feel strong, I admitted. I don't even know how to describe it. You will, she assured me. When you get home, we'll be there for whatever you need. A place to stay, help finding a lawyer, someone to hold your hand through the process. You're not alone in this. Her words unleashed tears I hadn't realised I was holding back. For all my brave speeches and dignified exits, I was still a woman whose life had been upended by betrayal. Thanks, Mum. I managed through the tightness in my throat. I'll call you when I get back. As the second week of the cruise progressed, I found myself thinking about Daniel less and less. Instead, I was focused on the new experiences each day, brought the feel of warm sand between my toes at the private island, stopped the taste of authentic jerk chicken at a local restaurant in Jamaica, the sound of steel drums playing as the ship sailed away from port. One evening, as I watched the sunset from a quiet corner of the deck, Diana found me and slid into the chair beside mine. Penny for your thoughts, she said, handing me a fruity cocktail. I accepted it with a smile. Just thinking about how different this trip turned out from what I expected. Life has a way of doing that, she observed. The real question is whether you're better or worse for the change. I considered her question seriously. Both, I think. I've lost something I valued, but I'm finding parts of myself I'd forgotten about. Diana nodded. When my first marriage ended after my ex had an affair, I thought I'd never be whole again. But looking back, it was less about losing him and more about losing the future I'd imagined. That's exactly it, I said, surprised by how perfectly she'd articulated what I was feeling. I'm mourning the life I thought we were building. The good news, Diana said, raising her glass in a toast, is that you get to build something new, something that might be even better because it will be truly yours. We clinked glasses as the last sliver of sun disappeared below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of pink and purple. In that moment, I could almost believe her. On the last night of the cruise, I attended the farewell gala dinner with Eleanor, Harold, and Diana. I wore the red dress again, but this time not for Daniel's benefit. I wore it because it made me feel confident, powerful, beautiful. As we enjoyed our dessert, Eleanor raised her glass. To new friendships formed at sea, and to Laverna, who showed us all what grace under pressure looks like. I blushed at her words. I don't know about grace. I think I just survived. Sometimes that's enough, Harold said with the wisdom of his 70 years. The rest comes later. The next morning, as the ship docked back in Miami, I stood on my balcony watching the city skyline come into focus. 2 weeks ago, I had boarded this ship as Daniel's betrayed wife, consumed by pain and the desire for some kind of reckoning. Now I was disembarking as just Laverna, a woman with wounds that were beginning to heal and a future that, while uncertain, was entirely her own. I didn't see Daniel during disembarkation. Perhaps he had arranged for early departure, or maybe he was simply avoiding the main exits, knowing I might be there. It didn't matter. The confrontation that had seemed so important at the beginning of the trip now felt like a distant memory, overshadowed by the new connections and experiences I'd gained. As my taxi pulled away from the port, I didn't look back at the ship. Instead, I looked forward toward Miami's sunlit streets and the flight that would take me home, not to the house I had shared with Daniel that no longer felt like home, but to my parents' house where I would stay until I figured out my next steps. The cruise had ended, but my journey was just beginning. 6 months after the cruise, I stood in the empty living room of my new apartment, surrounded by unpacked boxes and the afternoon light streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows. The place was half the size of the house Daniel and I had shared, but it was mine, completely mine. The divorce had been finalized 3 weeks earlier. Daniel hadn't contested anything, perhaps out of guilt, or perhaps because he genuinely wanted a clean break. Our house had sold quickly, and with my share of the proceeds, plus my savings, I had made a down payment on this apartment in a vibrant neighborhood across town. The day I signed the final divorce papers, I had expected to feel devastation. Instead, I felt an unexpected lightness, as if I'd put down a heavy backpack after carrying it for too long. The pain hadn't disappeared entirely. There were still moments when a song or a memory would catch me off guard, but it had transformed into something manageable, something that no longer defined me. My phone chimed with a text from Natalie. Wine and pizza tonight to christen the new place. I smiled and typed back, absolutely. Bring Eleanor and Harold too, they're in town for the weekend. Since returning from the cruise, I had stayed in touch with the friends I'd made. Eleanor and Harold had even visited twice, turning what could have been lonely holidays into warm gatherings. Diana and I exchanged regular emails about our lives, and she had recently sent photos from her latest cruise, this time with her husband, who had apparently decided to see what all the fuss was about. Ashley, my cabin attendant, had become an unexpected pen pal. She sent postcards from various ports, and I sent updates on my post-cruise life, as she called it. Her most recent card had announced she was leaving the cruise line to go back to school for hospitality management. Professional changes had come swiftly after my return. I had resigned from the design firm where I'd worked for years, unwilling to navigate the awkwardness of potential projects with Daniel's architecture company. Instead, I had taken the leap to start my own interior design consultancy, specializing in sustainable, wellness-focused spaces. The first few months had been lean, but word of mouth had brought steady clients, each project more interesting than the last. Just last week, I had signed a contract to redesign a boutique hotel, a project that would have seemed impossibly daunting a year ago. As I unpacked kitchen items, carefully wrapping each glass in newspaper, my phone rang. It was my mother. "How's the unpacking going, sweetheart?" she asked. "Slowly but surely," I replied. "I'm starting with the kitchen so I can at least make coffee in the morning." "Smart thinking. Your father and I were wondering if you'd heard anything from Daniel lately." I placed a mug on an open shelf. "Not directly, But Natalie ran into a former colleague who mentioned that he and Jessica broke up shortly after returning from the cruise. Apparently, she couldn't get past the lying. Are you surprised? I considered the question. No, relationships that begin with deception rarely end well. To be honest, I don't think about them much anymore. And it was true. Daniel had gone from being the center of my world to a footnote in my story. The cruise that I had boarded with such pain and anger had become a turning point rather than an ending, a fork in the road that had led me to an unexpected but welcome destination. That's my girl, my mother said proudly. Oh, before I forget, your cousin Melissa is getting married in June. The invitation says +1. Anyone special you might bring? I laughed. Mum, I've been divorced for 3 weeks. Just asking, she said innocently. That nice client of yours, the one with the lake house project, seemed very impressed with your work, and he's single. I'm not ready for that, I said, but without the defensive edge that such comments would have provoked a few months ago. Right now, I'm enjoying getting to know myself again. After we hung up, I continued unpacking, arranging my belongings in this new space that would become home. Each item I placed felt like a deliberate choice rather than a default setting. The art I selected for the walls, the books I arranged on shelves, the plants I positioned near windows, all reflected the person I was becoming, not the person I had been in my marriage. That evening, as my friends gathered in my half-furnished apartment sharing pizza and wine from paper plates and plastic cups, I looked around at the circle of faces, some old, some new, and felt a profound sense of gratitude. I propose a toast, Natalie announced, raising her cup, to Laverna, who turned a cruise of horrors into the voyage that launched 1,000 ships of awesome. Everyone laughed and raised their drinks. To new beginnings, Eleanor added, and to the wisdom to recognize them even when they're disguised as endings. Later, after everyone had left and I was alone in my new space, I stepped out onto the small balcony. The city lights stretched before me, a constellation of human life and possibility. The night air carried the scent of someone's balcony garden, jasmine perhaps, or honeysuckle. 6 months ago, I had stood on another balcony, watching another set of lights, my heart broken and my future uncertain. I could never have imagined then where that journey would lead me. The cruise that was meant to be Daniel and Jessica's romantic getaway had instead become my passage to a new life. Perhaps that was the most important lesson in all of this. Sometimes the most painful betrayals can lead to the most powerful transformations. When Daniel planned that cruise with his lover, he thought he was escaping our marriage. Instead, he inadvertently set me free from a relationship that had already begun to diminish me, free to discover my own strength, free to create a life that was authentically mine. As I looked out at the city I now called home in a different way, I thought about all the women like me who had faced betrayal and survived. Women who had stood at similar crossroads and found the courage to choose the unknown path rather than the familiar one. Women who had discovered, as I had, that the end of a relationship didn't have to mean the end of joy, growth, or possibility. The cruise that was meant to break me had instead rebuilt me stronger, more resilient, and infinitely more self-aware. And while I wouldn't wish such pain on anyone, I couldn't regret the journey it had set me on. That Caribbean cruise had not been the vacation I expected, but it had given me something far more valuable than relaxation or escape. It had given me myself back again, and for that unexpected gift, I was profoundly grateful. Have you ever experienced a moment when what seemed like the worst thing in your life turned out to be a disguised blessing? How did you find the strength to turn pain into growth? Share your stories in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more real-life journeys of resilience and transformation. Thank you for sailing through this story with me, and remember, even the stormiest seas eventually lead to calm waters.